Hi, welcome to another video of GeoSpinach. Today we're going to look at how to deal on routing on a war game scenario, a Kriegsspiele, as von Moltke said, using a scenario of a unit of 2 battalions, expecting an attack from an unknown direction, and the attacker will act in the Japanese way of war, as it was in World War II, and how to deal with a routing situation, what not to do, and what to do in a routing situation. So let's get into the video directly. So here we have the 2 companies. So firstly, we have the headquarters of the company 2, which is here on the top left, and the headquarters of battalion 2. So each one of these has 4 other companies. We're not getting into much details regards to the specialized units. We are only care about the combat units, and we assume that the HQ has some sort of units itself. Now, the allocation of the forces prior to the battle is such to protect the bottlenecks of the bridge over here, of a potential attack from the forest here, and the protection of the city from the vital routes all around. So that's the general idea. So let's see first a negative scenario. This video builds upon the video that I made that explains what routing is in war and why routing is very dangerous. So we're going to go over that very quickly before we go directly into how to deal with routing. So firstly, let's focus on this specific area. Let's assume that in this case, the red team, we call them the Japanese. Since they're using the Japanese way of war, we'll rely on using terrain and attacking through areas that you wouldn't expect them to attack, and using a lot of initiative and massive aggressions. So we have here the units of Company 2, of Battalion 2, which are wrongly placed in the forest, so they don't know what's really happening over here. It's quite unknown. That is because the officer might be bad. There could be many factors in war that can go wrong, and in this case, let's assume that that officer is not doing its duty right and has its 3 platoons concentrated on the right flank. Maybe he observed that area and he believes it's unable for forces to move through there. So let's assume that forces do move through there. So the Japanese in this case can create some sort of pontoon bridge, and they just barely manage to cross in 1 company. And that company, let's say it's a forest, it's a more jungle area. So company 2 here does not know of the situation that these units have already crossed. At the same time, there are 3 more companies waiting to cross, so consisting of 1 battalion. In this scenario, the Japanese have less troops than the attacker. The concept is that even with less troops, as the Japanese have shown us repeatedly in World War II, they could deliver a victory, and as Rommel did as well. So here, the platoons of the first company of the Japanese does a surprise attack on the units of the second company of the black team, and as a result of this attack, so with the orange here, you can see that the platoon is firing on the first platoon. So 2 Japanese platoons are firing on the first platoon, and the headquarters are also under fire. As a result, the company 2, maybe because of a bad commander and so forth, starts to get demoralized. The unit starts to lose cohesion, and as a result, they rapidly pull back because they are losing communications with their headquarters and they're getting panicky. As this happens, and they started to get some sort of encircle, I want you here to pay attention to the fact that they still haven't received quite a lot of casualties, each individual platoon. They got surprised and shocked, but the attackers was mainly using small arms. The defenders were already in pre-assigned defensive positions, and except the first platoon, which was surprised, the rest of platoons are at full strength. With the blue here, you can see the damage that each unit has taken. The only issue here is that they lost communication with their company commanders and they are panicking, and in their attempt to flee, that is where the majority of casualties do occur in war. In your attempt to retreat from the field, the enemy, since you are not putting fire on him, has the ability to start shooting at you at very high precision. And as a result, the whole company gets routed. And we enter into this scenario. So the company 2 of the battalion 2 is completely routed at this point and massively demoralized. So it's running for its life. And the battalion of the headquarters of the second battalion doesn't know what's happening. And that's the first mistake it does. Rather than trying to take control of the situation, what it does, as well as many British officers did in World War II, is rapidly, with very minimal forces, try to conduct some sort of a counterattack on that specific area. And this results to a situation like this. So the Japanese forces, in this case, allocated an area here where they are preparing an ambush because they are expecting some sort of a counterattack, as also to be able to protect their HQ. And at the same time, they're concentrating all of their 3 remaining platoons to attack and capture the city down here. Now, unknowns to them and unknowns to the battalion 2, one platoon is moving in to intercept them. The issue here is the fog of war. As we mentioned so many times, the fog of war is very vital. No one is knowing what is happening in the battlefield. At the same time, battalion number 1 starts to redirect some of its units on its left flank, thinking of a possible attack on its flank over there and utilizing the urban terrain to be able to protect itself. Now, the pink arrows here show the levels of demoralization that start to accumulate. Those levels gradually change throughout the battle. At the same time, the 3rd platoon is commanded into a quickly counterattack to assess the situation. And we move to a situation where the 3rd platoon gets ambushed over here and receives quite some casualties, but gets heavily demoralized. And the 1st platoon, getting attacked by 3 other platoons on an open terrain, receives massive casualties, gets demoralized, and causes a situation of getting massively routed. So the 3rd platoon just running for its life, completely ignoring orders. The same occurs for the 1st platoon. The commanders of the 2nd battalion at this point have already lost 3 of their companies. Sorry, I was referring to platoons. They already have lost 3 of their companies, and at this point they're just commanding a total retreat of all of their forces just to save their skin, resulting to a total rout. And we come to a situation like this. So they allow chaos to spread, they haven't maintained communication, and they got fooled by the fog of war because the whole 1st battalion here did practically nothing throughout the battle. They just remain at the positions unknowing of the attack and probably expecting attack from multiple directions, and by doing so they allowed a complete destruction of their forces. And now, not knowing the quantity of the enemy's force over here because of the fog of war, they do not know how many forces are they expecting. And since they are left flank, so all of the area here is now not protected, and the enemy has control of the bridge, so if it has more forces, it can now pour them in much faster, for example, armored forces. It will force the 1st battalion to retreat. Now, let's see a scenario how you deal with this situation. Now, we go again back to the scenario where the 2nd company got routed and runs for its life. Now, how should both battalions react in this scenario to be able to avoid the scenario we just described? So first of all is maintain communications with your forces. So it's very important that the 1st company over here to be able to communicate with the 2nd company to know what's happening, to get as many information as possible, and as well as protect the communications with the other battalion. Then at the same time, both of these but one of these battalions should remain at the bridgehead. So if there are other armored forces on the opposite side expecting to attack, controlling that bridgehead is vital, but at the same time moving some forces back as to create some sort of a reserve, which is very vital, so to protect the city. At the same time, the 1st Battalion should redirect more forces on its flanks, so it still doesn't know what's happening, so it's creating a shield on its western side. Since it might expect an attack to come from here, it doesn't know, so it's moving forces there, and it's just leaving enough forces to cover the bridgeheads over the river and in the city. Now, moving on to part 2. The battalion has not, the Japanese in this case, have not received any attack here, so they're going on the offensive, as they did. The units of the 3rd Company over here on the north are already inducted in the pre-assigned defensive positions, so they are in a position to receive an assault, so they have good defensive positions. The same applies for the 4th Company, since they are in an urban area. The 1st Company has managed to establish communication with the 2nd Company, which still has received quite a lot of casualties, but its morale now starts to gradually become better as it is able to communicate with what is happening. And now gradually both of the battalions should cautiously try to ascertain what is happening with the situation. So since the 1st Company has, the 2nd Battalion has received an attack on the south, and the 1st Battalion has not received an attack on its west, then gradually the 1st Battalion, it's moving 2 of its companies to a very small and counter-attack to cover the fog of war in a general concentrated manner, but at the same time quite spread. And at the same time, the 2nd Company of the 2nd Battalion should move in to protect them on their flanks to a possible flanking maneuver. Moving on, we come to a situation where the Japanese here, the 4th Company of the Japanese, is bogged down with intensive fighting with the 3rd Company of the 2nd Battalion. Both of them are receiving casualties, but the Japanese here are receiving more casualties than the black team. The reason I'm using the Japanese is because it's the school of war that I'm referring to, but for the black team I haven't referred to any specific school of war. So they are receiving less casualties. The same applies in the city. Because of the urbanization of the terrain, the Japanese companies are receiving way more casualties, but because of the way they fight their wars, they are attacking way more aggressively. At the same time, they created a rear guard to protect them from the possible counterattack from the city. But at the same time, the fog of war also applies to the Japanese forces. They don't know that this is happening. So their whole plan is relying on surprise and that the 1st Company will stay put in the city. Now, as the 2nd Company, as the 1st Battalion gradually moves in and the fog of war gradually clears and they haven't faced any resistance until this point over here, then they can feel much safer to now move way more aggressively to ascertain the situation and support the units of the 2nd Battalion. And as this happens, the fog of war is almost completely gone because they know there are no more units over here. The units of the 4th Company of the 1st Japanese Battalion has received massive casualties, and now it's receiving reports from its HQ that the HQ is receiving an attack, so it will try to retreat, but this will be intercepted by the 3rd Company of the 1st Battalion, which will cause it to be eliminated. At the same time, the 2nd Company of the 2nd Battalion, because it has received quite a lot of casualties and it's a bit still demoralized, it's just going to create a small rear guard to protect the action that is happening in the north. And at the same time, since the units of the second company and the fourth company have entered the forest and have not encountered many forces, now they can be sure that it's very vital for them to attack as fast as possible to eliminate any possible bridgeheads in their defenses where the enemy has managed to push through. While all of this is happening, it's always very vital to control the main bridgeheads. So at this time, the first company of the first battalion still stays as the reserve and spreads out its platoon. The same happens with all remaining forces of the first battalion, reserve units or support units, just to cover these positions until this operation takes in force. So in this time, because they're not knowing if an attack is going to come from other directions, the operation to eliminate the forest has to be done fast. So it's committing its fourth company, which is last remaining reserve except the first, to ensure the success of the attack in the forest, even if they do not know how many forces they are encountering there. And at the same time, the third company will move in, not knowing that it will intercept the fourth company of the Japanese, but to support the attack of the third company of the second battalion. At the same time, the urban warfare continues, which starts to become quite bloody, and both sides have to take quite a lot of casualties. Now, moving on to the situation where the headquarters of the Japanese have been completely eliminated, the same as the fourth company of the Japanese. Now, the third platoon, even if he had received quite casualties, it should move in and reestablish the position at the bridgehead. One of the companies, in this case the fourth company, should remain here to create a defensible position for a possible remaining extra attack from enemy forces that may come or haven't come yet. Since no attack has been reported over here, they can be safely assumed that at least they are covering all of their possible inputs, and at the same time they are moving their last two companies into attack positions along with the second company to completely eliminate the forces. And at this situation, the remaining forces of the Japanese, which have lost complete their communications with their high command, even if to begin with they are very suicidal and they have very high morale, at this point they don't know what is happening across here. The fog of war has eaten them alive. So in this case, they're completely surrounded. They know they're completely surrounded. They know they cannot break out, and they will be attacked by all sides, which at this point it will imply simply that they will be eliminated. Now, the lessons that we learn here, and which are the most important lessons, is the fact that if you're in a situation where your forces get routed, it's very, very vital to maintain communication with your forces at all times. Initiative is very important, as we have shown in the first example, where you fool the enemy using initiative, but at the same time, it's a double-edged sword. It creates a fog of war that the other enemies can exploit to your distraction. And as a result, while aggression is good, if you are not Rommel or some other great generals of the Japanese, which I don't think should say their names because they are quite criminals, then you should be a bit wary of very aggressive maneuvers. Of course, I'm not saying aggression in war is generally bad, it's quite hard to be executed, and it has quite high levels of risks. So yes, as a surprise attack with a very high aggression, completely relying on fog of war might result in your victory, but at the same time, it might be your cause of defeat. In this situation, to begin with, the Japanese wouldn't have any chance to win either than the scenario they have chosen. In a pure game theoretical scenario, pure mathematical, because the forces of the red team are already controlling all of the main bridgeheads and defensible positions. Any attack by a single battalion, it will be impossible to break through. As a result, the idea of concentrating force, using a sneak attack, and then rapidly and very fast decimate the enemy's first battalion and utilize the destruction in detail, to destroy the enemy using superior forces at one location, even if your overall forces are much lower, is the best scenario for them. What is important is for the red team, in the black team in this situation, to be able to ascertain of the situation, not to take drastic actions, and never allow chaos to spread. So always maintain cohesion. Thanks again for watching. Please like and subscribe. If you have any more recommendations, I would love to make a video about them. And see you on the next video. Good night.